Okay, so I'm going to tell you a really great story about the Alpenrose dairy site in Portland, Oregon. And the point of the story is not to really go through all the history and the importance of the site as it pertained to its location and its civic contributions, but it's really it helped me understand how do things like the Terracotta Army, the Great Sphinx at Giza, Newgrange, Meadowcroft, Petra, all these sort of World Heritage sites that we take for granted now, which were discovered by farmers plowing their fields or Meadowcroft. It wasn't until 1955 that there were some artifacts found in a groundhog burrow. That one's a little unique because it's like a pre Clovis site. Whereas a lot of the other ones, like Giza and the Sphinx, it wasn't until 1857 when the French Egyptologists went there that they started clearing out and cleaning up the site around there. Newgrange, the landowner starts investigating this big mound and figures out everything associated with that site. And so I understand the classic anthropological explanation for these things, which is that floods and famines and war and fires and people flee and they never come back to these areas. But the Terracotta Army, especially the Chinese, had already had writing for about 1,000 years prior to the Terracotta Army being built, and so places where there's a strong oral tradition and means of communication and all these other areas, you would think something would be written down, discussed somewhere, or that this simply wouldn't become forgotten when you consider just how important it was to all the people who built these things. Just the undertaking. This is like a great work of a people where everyone is contributing, everyone is doing something and knows what's going on, participating in some way, and yet it simply gets covered in dirt and the sands of time, etc. Well, I've watched that happen in very short order with the Alpenrose site. We have a place that was very important to the citizens of Portland. If you talk to people here, they've been to Alpenrose. It starts as a dairy in, let me just read you this little part, in 1891 is the original dairy at Southwest 35th and Vermont Street, where 3-gallon milk cans were taken by horse-drawn wagons into downtown Portland. It then, in 1916, becomes the Alpenrose Dairy, named after the flower that blooms in the Swiss Alps, and they converted this delivery truck area over into what became the larger site. So it's 52 acres, by the way. So what I have is, let me show you. So I'm doing this because I'm finally wrapping up a piece for the son of these two people you see here. He becomes the CEO later. His name's Rod Birkland, and I'm going to give him this piece of art. Because as I went up to the Alpenrose site, there's this purple box back here that had all of his parents' letters and personal artifacts. And before I did anything, I just took everything up to him and I was like, do you want these items? I have all this personal stuff. And he was like, no, you can have it. We talked for a while. So these are some of the things which came out of those letters, which were written between 1937 and 1941. About June of 41, all the letters stop. But it was interesting. I got to read their thoughts like as the war was breaking out in the United States. But these are all the stamps that were on top of the letters. And then the way that they would sign each letter, they would always write "I love you" in a different way. Always a creative, different way. Every letter had a different means to say "I love you." And in the center, I put this one quote from one of the letters where I said, "Character would be bleached of all of its color were it to live forever in the sunshine." Anita went to Reed College in Portland, very well educated, was reading Plato and writing, her writing style is very good. So here's just a sample of, her hand. Sorry, the sun's kind of in the way. There we go. Her handwriting, and it's cursive, which to me is like, yeah, I mean, you could probably take someone who's never seen cursive before. I could probably figure that out if they sat with it long enough and understood the structure and the English language. But since cursive is no longer taught in schools, it really is becoming a forgotten way of writing. It will be a dead written translation of symbols. And so that was really interesting. I'm living through this period as I'm going up to the site. So the Alpenrose dairy is decommissioning, and it's selling off to another dairy company, and it's winding its operations down. But while I lived here, I got to go up there and enjoy all the things that they would do, especially like this big Christmas village. And I'll show you some of the photographs and things from everything that they did at the dairy site. But it's basically a dirt patch now, and it's becoming homes. So one of the pieces I usually have up on my wall there is, so this is the picnic fields from the dairy site. These are all reclaimed items from there, including like these are the rose petals from the different roses that they had up there. But this is a tomb. This is the grave of Rousseau. Anita got to travel the world and wrote about different things with doing missionary work and other things. But this enters into technology, into the sort of Sephirot, and then man's recreating the Sephirot down here through technology, and these say thermoscientific. And so it's about the sort of man's attempt to recreate things that were once, parts that were divine, and the corrosiveness that goes along with that. So that's my own personal piece that I'll keep. But a lot of my art is built from things that I collected at the site because it was up there for so long. And as it became abandoned, different doors and areas would open up. So like the site itself was sort of opening to me to go into these different rooms and collect these different artifacts. So that's what I did. And here's a picture. Here's a picture from the 50s. And they had already built like the quarter midget track, softball field. My house is back there. It's hard to see, but it's a little powdered blue house, which was the original color. And let's get into some of the good stuff. So the time period of the letters are when Ray Birkeland is in Anderson, California, and he is going to the Foursquare Church, the college, the seminary school, I should say. It's seminary school. And this is his, pastoral theologies, where he is going to become a pastor in a church. So everything is rich with a lot of divine, I don't even want to say overtone, it's just divine presence in the way that they're living their lives, right? The church and the communities are so important to them. And they clearly, it's reflected in everything that the dairy became and all the things that the dairy did. So here's a 1967 calendar, and you can see how big the site was in 1967, and it had already built at this point. the Storybook Lane, the Western Village, the Quarter Midget Track. It didn't have the velo. Oh, it had the cross country bike track. They called it an Olympic style racetrack. It's number 20 on there. It's at the very bottom is the velodrome, bicycle racing. So clearly, and they had the Little League World Series at this site for many years. So the importance of it, they had this, binder about memories from 1967, and I put a bunch of the items in here that are really good. So it's a whole exposition really on Americana at the same time. And everything like this was around 4th of July, so it even comes with your own Declaration of Independence insert. And good summertime songs, and you can see their names in here. Carl Cadonau. He was also Anita's brother, and he helped run the dairy until Rod Birkeland, that's the son of the two that I showed you. Rod Birkeland becomes the CEO, and Ray, his father, Ray Birkeland, in all the letters, he wants to be a pastor, and he doesn't want to be involved with the dairy. And so Anita's trying to convince him that, he kind of have a nice life here and that he could have a job, and her dad would help him, get involved in the dairy business, which I think that's how it goes, but I'm not exactly sure. They were involved in the circus, bringing the circus to Portland. And this woman's real interesting. Eloise Birchfield, and she becomes Berchtold. Eloise Berchtold. She ends up dying in Ohio, being trampled by elephants, which break out of her circus tent, and they have to call in the police snipers and shoot them with tranquilizer darts as they're running through the town. It's a crazy news article, but I kind of, as I'm going through this stuff, I was like, well, whatever happened to this person? Rusty Nails is another one. A lot of people in Portland remember Rusty Nails, the clown, and, what he would do and be part of the Alpenrose dairy and what was going on up there. Here is, I think, the only photograph of the entire generational family. And so a lot of this stuff I'm going to donate to somebody who has already accepted it, and I think they're going to try to curate a little curate some of the stuff that I'm showing you now. But Anita, the same thing I'm talking about, they're going to ancient ruins, right? Which is what I'm doing. I'm going to an ancient ruin that's in process. It's becoming the necropolis. And yeah, I'll talk a little more about that side of it, but here's the original photo that you saw on that cover. So that's the grandparents. And then, like I was mentioning about what happens at the site, here's a photo of the velodrome racing. Someone who had won a lot in the quarter midget racetrack that was up there. They built this Western Village, and at Christmas time, and they built. You can't see it in here, but they built an opera house as well in here. But very popular place to go for Christmas in Dairyland, and they had a whole thing with Santa. They had one room was a whole miniature train model set that was all set up. It was awesome. And they had their own newspapers, Alpenrose News and the Independent Gazette, and it's just steeped in all kinds of aspects of Americana and football, and up at the top it says Veritas sua ars nova. I put it in my play, It means truth, let be, arts, your guiding star, your supernova. Um, I believe that. I think that's a, and I think Anita wrote this. I can't prove it, but just from the letters and her time at Reed, I think that was her contribution to add a little Latin into the Alpenrose dairy experience. Anyway, let me just sort of conclude. I'm wrapping everything up. Here she is with Rod, by the way. So that's who I'm going to give the art piece to, her son. And their travels around the world. And I just got so much out of the whole experience, which has taken me many years, and things that I've dismantled. And I have a lot of Amy Semple McPherson's original theological writings that were written on typewriters, actually, which are pretty interesting. And I've incorporated that into some of my performance pieces. But how does this? So what happened, right? I mean, clearly a pillar, a location, which many Portlanders know about, which had influence, where had arts, had attraction, had commerce. How does it simply become just another patch of homes, in which is a lot of ways abandoned? If it was 100 years ago, it would just be abandoned, right? And it would just be overgrown like these other sites that I mentioned. But now, because we have, in the Heideggerian sense, standing reserve and end framing, which is that these are all things which should become commercialized. Any vacant property is basically standing reserve for housing, for tax income, for revenue, etc., etc. So the state does play a part because it's so large and powerful. And if the state would have been more interested in a creative use for the land, like if you would take all the things that Portland is concerned about, indigenous land and acknowledgments, and try to synthesize that, this would have been a great location to take these disparate things that we talk about and try to create something like, you know, another free roaming American buffalo patch and some farmland and some areas where you could have indigenous cultures and Western cultures sort of combining and creating something, you know, unique and special that maybe becomes an attraction. Well, this all takes work and energy and effort, but it's like even beyond that, okay, beyond some creative use of the land, why is it that the ownership, you know, doesn't take a more invested approach in curating the property? Well, they're old, right? I mean, I went to Rod's house to ask him if he wanted any of the stuff back before I made art out of it. And so he's like, no, you go ahead. And so I'm going to take him this stuff up at the end here. But they've lived their lives already. And I think the youth, or the younger, we could say, often having their own adventures, their own families, their own initiatives, don't want to carry the baton forward. It's really somewhat that simple, where the expectation that something that was great could continue to be passed on and passed down requires the people who you are passing that to want to take their energy and put it back into that area of life that was important to the people who are no longer there. But you can kind of, I mean, if you really think about it, you can recreate a lot and keep that kind of energy going. But that energy tends to, just like the, you know, Terracotta Army or Newgrange or whatever, once the energy of the people goes, and you can tell these oral stories to others, you can show them photographs, you can tell them what was once there, And even if it was still there, right? Like, even if I told you all this and the site was still there, there's just no way to get people to come back in and say, yeah, this is actually worth investing and recreating and maintaining and doing something unique with. Whereas the easy way is just give me the money. No, I'm just going to sell it. Give me the money. And it's caused all kinds of controversies, just this one thing. You can look it up in Portland, and like the mayor got involved, and the old mayor got pepper sprayed, and like it leads to all this other crazy, chaotic stuff that happens around this site. But anyway, that's sort of my conclusion as to what generally happens amongst groups of people is the energy required to sustain something is in conflict with other pursuits of the nation state or the city or the people or the families, right? Just to bring it all the way down, like they're pursuing other things at this time, and they're not going to pursue history because they don't feel like it has that energy transference. And so people really have to be, it's kind of like what's happening in the entirety of America at this moment. There's a desecration of our history that's going on. There's an abandoning of the history. There's a rewriting of what once happened. I mean, there's an entire attempt to reframe the founding of the country from 1776 into 1619 when the first slave ships arrived. It is a ludicrous proposition. But that's where the energy is, right? It doesn't matter what I think. That's where the money and the energy is going. And so you end up with a sort of flattening out of all experience, which could have happened had we thought, creatively in just even the slightest regard to do something cool, to make it even just, a mountain bike park or a place where kids could come, something that brings the vitality of all the history that I have shown you back into the actual location of that place, right? But it takes tremendous effort and energy, and we're all trying to get by. I understand that. But that's the story in a nutshell of Alpenrose and what happened. And I'll conclude with the very last important thing, because I think I forgot to mention it. I know why the Opera House was built. I'm probably one of the only people who knows why the Opera House was built. Because in the letters that went back and forth, Aimee Semple McPherson in Los Angeles, she started up the first Christian broadcasting on AM radio. So she's a female preacher, which is already very, it was controversial. And you can watch an American Masters on Aimee Semple McPherson. It's a real interesting little side story where she comes from a dairy family. This is a dairy family. He's going to become a pastor in the Foursquare Church. And she builds a theater to take the biblical narratives like Lazarus and the rich man and perform these theatrical, these stories in front of an audience. And that's what they wanted to do with the Opera House. They built it as another way to go through for their faith and their religion and their devotion. It is like the offertory part of the Mass. It is their contributions back to bringing biblical Christian stories and have them in front of an audience. And it was a small place, but it's like very puzzling why an opera house would be built at a dairy farm. Of all the other things they could have built, right? So that's the reason why, and they talk about it in the letters. They talk about the amazing things that Aimee Semple McPherson is doing with her theater as a means of missionary work. Which was very important to them. And so, yeah, that's the story of what happened there. And I hope you got something out of this video. Thanks.